Good day to you all, my dear children. Today I brought out the presentation which will consist of the first midterm content of the novel Mill on the Floss. Let's see the content of the novel. You have to cover the book 1, Boy and Girl, for the first midterm. The presentation will be focused on the following areas: objectives, writer, background to the novel, plot summary, chapter summaries of book 1, themes and questions. Objectives of the presentation will be creating reading skills, create connection, promote empathy, faster application, allow for enjoyment. Now we are going to focus our attention regarding the writer. Who is the writer in Mill on the Floss? Who wrote Mill on the Floss? George Eliot. But her real name was Mary Ann Evans. She is an English novelist, journalist and a translator of the Victorian era. She used a male pen name George Eliot to ensure her and also shield her private and public scrutiny. T.S. Eliot used male name in order to criticize the typical Victorian society, and also she wanted to raise her voice against feminism. When studying the novel, it's important to know about the background of the novel. It means we have to consider about the writer as well as the society. Let's focus our attention regarding background to the novel Mill on the Floss. The novel Mill on the Floss belonged to the Victorian society. The Mill on the Floss is a feminist novel in the sense that it reveals the difficulty of Maggie's coming of age, and that difficulty is shown to be made harder by her society's narrow views about women. Actually, through Mill on the Floss, the writer tries to illustrate how women's talents and abilities controlled by the social setup, and also she tries to raise her voice against this. For that she uses a girl called Maggie, who is very rational and rebellious. She always tries to break the Victorian system. Because of that, she is criticized by the society. Only the educated, knowledgeable people like Mr. Tulliver and Miss RILLEY and some other characters understand the ability of Maggie, as well as they help to uplift them. Through the novel, Eliot challenged the boundaries of women's role in Victorian society. Now we are going to focus our attention regarding the plot summary. The novel spans in a period of 10 to 15 years. The writer uses third-person narration throughout the novel. The narrator is just an onlooker on the novel, and he maintains a nostalgic tone because his main intention is to criticize the society. When consider about the main character Maggie and Tom, we can see the character development of Maggie and Tom. The main protagonist of the novel is Maggie, and George Eliot tries to raise her voice using Maggie's character. Now I am going to introduce you the first midterm content. For first midterm you have to study the book 1. That means boy and girl. Book 1 consists of 5 chapters. They are as follows. The Tullivers of the Dorlcote Mill. Second chapter is the Riley give his advice. Next one, Tom comes home from the academy. Fourth chapter is enters the aunts and uncles. The last one is a visit to GARUM first. Now I am in the book 1 chapter 1. The Tullivers of the Dorlcote Mill. The first chapter is an introduction to Dorlcote Mill. The narrator stands on the bridge and looks at Dorlcote Mill, which is situated on the river Floss, and the small river ripples near the village of St. Oaks. The scene is peaceful, beautiful and pastoral. Even the sound of the mill churning the water is described as dreamy defense. From this vantage point of on the bridge, the narrator sees a man with a wagon. In here, Mr. Tulliver and Mr. Tulliver and Mrs. Tulliver had been talking about inside the parlor of the on that day. Then they are discussing about Tom. Mr. Tulliver tells his wife that he wants their son Tom to get a better education than him. Now I am in the book chapter 2, book 1. In this chapter we are learning about Mr. RILLEY. Mr. RILLEY is an intimate friend of Mr. Tulliver. Mr. Tulliver, in the second chapter, Mr. Tulliver drinks a brandy with RILLEY, a well-educated man who refers to the Tullivers as a people of all school. Mr. Tulliver praises Mr. RILLEY of his assistance in legal dispute over the height of the water near the mill, remarking that he thinks old Harry created the lawyers. He asks for advice about where to send Tom to school, since he wants his son to set up in a profession on his own rather than trying to inherit the family farm too soon. At the sound of her brother's name, Maggie stands up from her book and protests that Tom would never do any mischief to his father. Mr. Tulliver proudly tells Mr. RILLEY about Maggie's reading abilities, although he is that a woman has no business in being so clever. Miss RILLEY asks Maggie what she's reading, and she explained that she is reading Daniel Defoe and History of Devil, as well as the John Bunny's pilgrim progress. Mr. Riley wonders whether the devil is an appropriate subject for a little girl to read about. Mr. Tulliver's admit that he never wishes Maggie and being the boy of the family, since she would be match for any lawyer. Now I am in the third chapter. Tom comes home from the academy. In this chapter, Maggie wants to go with Mr. Tulliver to pick Tom from school, but Mr. Tulliver protests that it is too rainy for a girl to go out in her best bonnet. Maggie dips her hair in the water in a rebellion manner, and Mrs. Tulliver complains that people will judge her for having such a naughty child. Then he go away from the home, and Maggie runs outside and enter the mill where she loves to side up and down the haystacks. She talks to Luke, the head miller, and asks him whether he would like to borrow one of her books to learn about faraway people and animals. Like Dutchmen and elephants, Luke responds that he does not need to know anything more than what earns his daily bread. Maggie admits Tom isn't much of the reader either, although she loves him dearly and hopes they will always live together. She realized that Tom's rabbit have died. When Tom and Maggie see each other, they become very much excited. But when Maggie informed the news that his rabbit died, Tom become very upset and he blames for Maggie. Maggie asks for forgiveness. Finally, they become friendly with each other and they go for fishing. The narrator comments that the children are very transparent about their emotion, while adults have learned to restrain themselves. Now I am in the fourth chapter. Enter aunts and uncles. In this chapter, we are going to learn much about Mrs. Tulliver's three sisters. The characterization of Mrs. Tulliver's three sisters is the most important thing in this chapter, because they are totally different from one another. So we are going to study that difference and their nature in this chapter. Mr. Tulliver and Mrs. Tulliver were preparing themselves for Easter week, and they are having a family party. Mr. Tulliver's sisters are invited for the party by Mr. Tulliver, and Mr. Tulliver has three sisters. They are Dean, Pullet and Glegg. Characterization of three aunts, and there's a significant incident happened in this chapter, that is Maggie cut her hair. Aunts criticize Maggie's appearance. Everyone Maggie, but Mr. Tulliver, her father consoles her. The main intention of the writer is to criticize the Victorian society and women's role. Under that, he generates some themes. First one, knowledge and the ignorance. Second one, women's role and social pressure. Next one, tolerance and forgiveness. Next one, loss of innocence. Progress versus tradition. And the common versus individual interest are some themes she develops in this chapter. Now I am in the last chapter of the book 5, A Visit to GARUM. GARUM is a state that is belong to Mr. and Mrs. Fullett. One day Maggie and her mother visit to this estate with Lucy and Tom. When they went there, Maggie, Tom and Lucy started to build card houses, and Tom praises Lucy and insults Maggie. And this make so much angry about Tom, and Maggie decide to run away from the home because in several times she had been insulted as a gypsy. Though she went to gypsy, she can't bear up the lifestyle of gypsies because they had to eat very rough foods like bread and bacons. So it is difficult for Maggie. So Maggie asked one gypsy man to take her to home. So he does it, and Mr. Tulliver gives 5 shillings for returning his daughter. Maggie promised never to run away again. Maggie explained why she ran away from the home, and Tom and Maggie's quarrel become the main reason for her to do so. And also Mr. Tulliver consoles her. Now I am going to summarize the first lesson of the Mill on the Floss. This book is narrated in third person narration. The tone of the narrator is filled with nostalgia. The main character of the novel is Maggie. She is not a typical Victorian girl. She always acts as a male character, and she is very rational. Due to this, she always criticized by her mother and from the society. She always gets love and affection from her father. Tom is the brother of Maggie. Maggie's aunts represent the contemporary Victorian society. Gypsy people highlights the social layer in the Victorian society. The main setting of the novel is Dorlcote Mill. Now I am going to wind up the presentation. These are just chapter summaries, but you should read the book carefully and answer for the following questions. Why Mr. Tulliver wants to give education for Tom? What does Maggie shows Mr. RILLEY that she is reading? What does Tom first get angry when he comes home from school? What are Maggie's intentions toward gypsies? Write a character analysis for the main character of the novel.